Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to introduce as our guest, Morgaine Witriol, and we're going to do a show about her beautiful project, Native Roots Healing, at nativerootshealing.com. Native Roots is an ancestral folk and herbal medicine school that was created to honor the elders and to hold space for all people who want to reclaim and reconnect to their own ancestral roots. Morgaine is an herbalist and the founder of Native Roots. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much to have me. It's an honor to be here.
So I found you because I guess somehow I got on your newsletter, and I also had downloaded a class that you gave at one of the places that I lectured also. And yours was, interestingly enough, about Jewish herbal practices.
Yes, I often teach about Jewish folk medicine.
Well, that was interesting to me, because I've been studying that for many years, but from the Sephardic point of view, because my grandmother is from Greece. And then I found it so amazing that your life path sounded to me so much like mine when I was younger, because I've written many books, including The Natural Medicine Chest. And in that book, I share a lot of the elders that I have studied with around the world and have asked me to document their traditional healing. Very often, those traditions are oral and very little is written about it. So it's been, such an amazing journey. And I said, wow, you actually found yourself in the rainforests of Belize, where I'm sure you know some of the herbalists who are there also, such as Anita Avigo. So one, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Were you introduced to herbal medicine as a child?
I was introduced to natural medicine and supplements and herbal alternatives by my mother, who had studied Ayurvedic medicine in her youth and was very open-minded towards natural substitute. She wasn't one that was big on vaccines. I remember often being in the garden with her. I remember taking things like cayenne pepper when I was sick. And she also had an herbal product line. And so she was a big inspiration. And then it just grew from there. I'd say that I never really had luck with Western medicine or pharmacological drugs. And so on the journey to search for my own health and navigate what that looked like, I got into herbal medicine.
Well, it sounds like it was a natural progression.
Yeah.
What area did you grow up in?
I grew up in New York.
As I did. Yeah. And then you said you were embraced by the Latino community and culture. How did that come into your life?
So growing up in New York, I just had a lot of Latino friends, and I spent a lot of time with their families, salsa dancing, just within the community. And that was really, I really valued, I had similar values based around family. And what was important in life really seemed to align with how their lifestyle and their own values. And so they all stopped speaking English around me at one point, and I decided to go down to Costa Rica to learn Spanish. And then from there, it just kind of progressed. And I felt very comfortable in Central and South American countries, and that's how I ended up in Belize.
Well, that's a wonderful story, and, so similar to my own, because I wound up living several years really in what they call a palapa, which you probably know is a grass shack. And since I'm Sephardic, within the Jewish tradition, I already knew Spanish from my grandparents because they speak Ladino. So I was very comfortable in all of those countries and actually lived there for many years in a grass shack where there was no running water, no electricity. We really gathered all our own wild food. And so much of the world still lived that way in those years. This was around 1968, 69. So now, of course, even those areas are so built up. When you were in Belize, did they already have things like cell phones, or was it still very backwardsy?
So when I was in Belize, it was around 2010, 2011, and different. So it's interesting because Belize doesn't really have any American products at all. There's still to this day no bowling alleys, no magazines, no malls, shopping malls, But the first time I went, I believe there were no smartphones. We just didn't have that kind of technology, but there were cell phones. My teacher talked about how much had changed in just in his lifetime. That technology had brought in a paved road, that all the Mayan people had stopped wearing their traditional trajes or outfits. He saw refrigerators come into his community, televisions. I remember being kind of shocked that his grandkids were watching, like the Fast and the Furious on TV, or there's always a TV going in the background, but he used to reminisce about the times when technology had not been in the community. And I think that between the shift in religion and all the different missionaries and different religious people coming in trying to convert the Mayan people's religions and the technology, a lot had changed for them. So there was a huge gap between the older generation and the younger generation, and what the younger generation valued and the shame that they had in the old ways, the old traditions, and this desire for the new way, which was what I saw very much as like what they saw on TV, what they were taught through these new religions, they felt was much better. And so I was really inspired to work with the younger generation on how can we honor the traditions of the grandparents while still embracing this ever-changing future that we're faced with, because technology is just part of our reality. And so is an ever-changing world. All things change. The style of dancing changes, languages change throughout time. And so how can we bring in the ancestral wisdom into the younger generations?
Well, that's a worthy cause and something that I've definitely been working on. One thing that was so interesting to me is in Jamaica, as I bring people there on workshop every year. And one year, a whole group of pharmacists came with us who grew up in Jamaica. And these were older people. They came back to do a workshop on Jamaican medicine, bush medicine. But meanwhile, they grew up in the bush. They had gotten so disconnected from their own roots. They were pharmacists. They were living in the United States. And they came with me back to Jamaica to study Jamaican bush medicine. I found that really just kind of ironic. And when we showed them something like noni, a big noni fruit that was ripe, they said, "Oh, my grandmother always made that. We called it duppy soursop." And then the next morning, they had ripped all the noni off the trees, which is not how we, of course, collect plants, honoring the plants that are there and only taking some so they can regenerate the next year. And they had just completely lost that entire connection. So it can happen so fast, even in one generation.
Absolutely. I very much feel that I lost a lot from there was a generation gap between me and my own grandparents. And they spoke a Yiddish that I don't speak or know. And all the knowledge that they had from, quote, the old world, and is something that I don't carry with me. And so I think it's really important when you see that generation gap, knowing and remembering that also happened to us. And it happens to a lot of families and a lot of different people from different backgrounds. And I think, like I said, it's rooted, it's got deep roots in colonization, in religion, and somehow being shamed and being told that where you come from and your lineage and your ancestry isn't worthy. And to lay that down for someone else's, or for a different thing, or for to be Americanized, or all of these things. And it's very natural to say, wait a minute, I want to get back to my roots. I want to reclaim that knowledge. And we work at Native Roots with our school. We teach a lot of the students that choose to come are doctors and nurses, and people that are in the more of the Western medicine background. And I think it's something that can, the two, although the old view is that the two can't work together, but it's very possible for the two to be integrated. And I think that certain hospitals and certain medical practices are now starting to integrate more and more natural medicine, herbal medicines, acupuncture, and things like that.
That is happening to a very small degree, but it is going in that direction, which is wonderful. And I want to remind our listeners, you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and today my guest is Morgaine Witriol, and she is the founder of Native Roots Healing, and that's the website to go to find out more. Now, Native Roots is located in New Mexico. Is that correct? What brought you to New Mexico?
Absolutely. It's located in Taos, and I guess the people are what brought me to New Mexico. It's just such a diverse group of people with such deep traditions. The majority of people that live there have a type of land-based spirituality. That's the knowledge and the wisdom is just integrated into their lifestyle. And then additionally to that, it's incredibly beautiful. There's mountains and waterfalls and rivers and hot springs. And then I guess one more thing to add is just that it's a very community-based place. I really felt held by the community. They have a saying that the mountain either takes you in or spits you out, and everything just started to flow for me when I got there. So
it's a beautiful place. My children were born, who are 47 and 42, in Bisbee, Arizona. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but very, very strong healing traditions are in Bisbee, both from people who've studied herbs on both sides of the border, and, heavily, the whole town is just about half in Mexico. So we get a lot of people and healers and traditional healers and herbalists from that area. So it's a very similar feeling, but it's warmer. In Taos, it gets pretty cool.
Yeah. And one thing that's nice about Arizona and New Mexico is the desert plants have a certain resiliency to them. They're very strong medicines because they have to have that durability to survive in the desert. And so just like the people, there's a certain rawness to the people, to the desert people and the mountain people. And I see that the people often reflect the plants and vice versa in characteristic and personality. So it's, the desert plants have their own character and they're really fun to work with.
Well, let's talk about one. I know so many different intricacies of many of our plant allies and healers. Share one favorite one.
Sure. So one of the plants that I love to go work with, and we often will take a field trip down to southern New Mexico to harvest, is Okatio. And Okatio is a very tall plant with spikes on it. And you would harvest it with a big pair of loppers. And then take 2 rocks to mash the kind of like it's like almost like a stick shape, mash it together to get all of the prickly parts off. And then you use the outer bark as a lymphatic cleanser for anything that is concentrated from the waist down. So if you it acts as a pelvic decongestant, and it's great for things like varicose veins or for the reproductive area. Should you have something like a cyst, it's wonderful just to move stagnant blood for anything in the pelvic region. It's a wonderful protectant as well, not only physically but energetically. So it stimulates the flow of the blood and the lymph, and and increases capillary flow. And anytime you think about that, you can also think about on an energetic level, it stimulates and moves energetic and emotional stagnancies as well. So if you're having trouble or feeling really stuck emotionally around a trauma or around a relationship, this is going to help to move that stagnant, stuck emotional stuff as well. We love it for moving out specifically sexual trauma, and that's for all genders, and helping to move that out of the body so that you can feel safe again, you can process those traumas. I look at it as the backbone of a person, and just following the doctrine of signatures, that kind of looks like your backbone or your spine. And so when you're feeling not aligned with yourself, or like you don't have healthy energetic boundaries in relation to others, whether that's your partner, your boss, your family member, it really helps you to create your own energetic boundaries, having that self-worth, having that strong backbone, and saying, hold on, I'm going to put these boundaries up and come into myself knowing what I need for me.
And that's interesting too, because Okatio, one way we used it on my homestead was we used it as a living fence. So we actually planted it very close together around, where the goats were, for instance. And it actually sort of grows together and acts like a natural fence. So that's also interesting when you're talking about it herbally in terms of supporting healthy boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen those fences. There's somebody has a fence in Taos made out of Okatio. They're not living plants, but I found that very creative. And they must have brought them from southern New Mexico. And I love also what it does is it kind of lights a fire inside. If you go look at the plant in early May, you'll see it's very tall. And at the top, it's blooming this bright red orange flower. And so I look at that as kind of bringing in the fire or the light. And I think it's been known for people that if you have a lot of anger, it can help to calm you down, or it can help bring you into your center and your core to a quieter, deeper place, to create self-confidence so that you don't have to push so hard on others. And it's also for people who talk too much, so much that they end up wearing themselves out. And then just going deeper down into the plant, it's really helpful for people that have that deep pain, emotional pain. And those who have a tendency to be self-destructive or turn against themselves in their emotional pain. So this is a good one for a lot of people. And you can take that flower and make a flower essence out of it if you feel called to working with flower essences. Otherwise, you can tincture it, and then you can take a spirit dose or an energetic dose, which would be just 1 to 5 drops of that. And on a more physical level, again, any kind of reproductive issue, including slow, stagnant, cramping menses, ovarian cysts, or any kind of inflamed ovarian issue, if you have a lot of coldness. And then it's incredible for the legs. People with diabetes can use it to bring down the circulation, because often with diabetes, you don't get the circulation down into your feet. And any kind of just cut off where you're not getting the flow or the energy down into the legs or down into the feet, this is going to move the energy downward. A plant that we often work with.
That's a lot for one plant. That was a beautiful, beautiful sort of monograph of all the different aspects of the medicinal use of that plant. Just share with us a little bit about Don Heriberto Cocon, who you studied with.
Yes, Don Bento is, so he worked with more famous medicine man who died in the 80s, his name was Eligio Ponti. And that person was super well known. They even named a national park after him, and people all over Central America would come to see him and get help from him. And so my teacher his father was best friends with Eligio Ponti. And when Eligio Ponti moved to Belize, he was also Yucatec Maya. He started to teach Don Bento at age 10 and up until, the day that he passed. So my teacher lived in Western Belize, and Don Bento was an activist in his younger days, an incremental part of helping the Mayan people get land. I think that was in the 70s. And the community really loved him, really, really respected him and adored him. But there was some concern about, is being an herbal medicine person evil? Is it witchcraft? Is it devil's work? So oftentimes they would go to him after they had gone to the doctor. Many of them had sold all their land to pay for the doctor's visits and had no money to their name. They'd show up broke and desperate, and he would help them no matter what. He had a little bit of land, and on that land, I think they had recorded over 600 plants that he knew just on his own land, multiple varieties of uses for each plant, from trees to flowers to roots. And he had gone deep into the rainforest to get, really rare plants and brought them back to his land and would take care of them, so that it was like a living pharmacy, a living herbal pharmacy. Whenever somebody needed something, he'd just go to his land and harvest the medicine fresh and then give it to them. One thing I really admired about him is he was a master at diagnosing people's sickness too. And so I had the chance to really learn about around 100 plants, 150 plants, while I studied with him. And I was really grateful for that. He was a really kind person and really wanted to share the knowledge. He said that the knowledge was worth more than the medicine. And I have carried that phrase with me for a long time. It's really inspired me, because the plants can be everywhere, but if you don't know how to use them, it's pointless. And he also felt that very concerned that the younger generation wasn't interested in learning, and was really had high hopes for the younger generation that they would have a change of heart and start to learn.
What a wonderful opportunity to bring forth a wonderful ancient healer's information into the future, because without someone like you who can document it in a modern way and bring it forward, a lot of times those stories are lost, because what I have found with some of my teachers is their own children were not at all interested. Like you said, they wanted to move on to modern times, become pharmacists and things like that, rather than bringing forth the ancient herbal and spiritual knowledge. So that was a real blessing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, and I continue to focus on how can we hold space for the younger generations to feel safe and to feel value in what their grandparents are doing. And how can we encourage, promote, practice the traditions, all of us, of our elders, our grandparents. And Don Bento was really the seed the inspiration for the school. Our school has about 10 elders that we work with, and they have all expressed their desire for the younger generation to start teaching too. So we also have younger teachers now that teach, but it's all in memory and in honor of Don Bento. And we continue to bring groups down to study in tropical places. We continue to work with his friend in Guatemala up until this year. He just passed away. And we'll continue to try to support the older generation as well as the younger generation in tropical medicine and tropical herbalism, as well as desert medicine and wherever we are. I think the real true key to it is looking at this younger generation and what they were brought into this world. How can we hold space? And it took me many years to get back to my own tradition. Right?
That's an interesting twist. But we do have to end because we're out of time. You did a beautiful job. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And our guest today was Morgaine Witriol, Morgaine. And the best place to look is nativeroot.healing.com. And thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your football buddy, your football buddy, or you, your best man, your worst man, you, your dog walker, your cat jogger. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. That's doihaveprediabetes.org.
Wait, did they just say 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes? That's 33.33333% of adults. That means it could be me, my boss, or my boss's boss, or me, my favorite sister, or my other sister. That's 7 members of my 21-person romantic book club. Wait, the 1 in 3 could be me, my karaoke partner Carol, or my karaoke enemy Jeff. I'm going to take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.